Well, if there's one thing that Advent is about, I suppose it's about waiting. We begin the new liturgical year on the first Sunday of Advent, and we're waiting for the end of Advent when we celebrate the Nativity of the Lord. Now, it is true that waiting is something you do when you've started something that you haven't yet finished. But it also occurred to me that waiting is just one of the several responses that we might have to what I call the in-between times of our lives. And is not life a series of in-between times? Time between the start and the finish, the time between the beginning and the end, the time between the first and the last. In fact, life itself, on this earth at least, is an in-between time, because temporal life, that is life in time, does have a beginning and it does have an end. And so the question, what do you do in the in-between times of life, is indeed an important one. As a therapist, I've learned a long time ago that what happens in a psychotherapy session is not nearly as important as what happens between the sessions, what happens in the in-between time. I saw a Ziggy cartoon in the newspaper many years ago that kind of stuck with me. In the first frame, Ziggy says, "I'm going up to the mountain to ask the wise old man what the meaning of life is." And so he's trudging up this mountain in the next frames, and he gets to the top, and here's this old man with a long white beard sitting down, leaning against a boulder and snoring away as he's coming out. Well, Ziggy wakes him up and he says, "Tell me, a wise one, what is the meaning of life?" And the wise old man replies, "The meaning of life is doing stuff." And he falls back asleep. So Ziggy comes down the mountain in the last frame. He says, "Well, it's a bit more elementary than I expected, but you can't argue with it." So doing stuff is what happens in the in-between times of our lives. And it's the nature of the stuff that we do in the in-between times that is of the utmost importance. In today's gospel, the story is told of Mary during a rather significant in-between time of her life. She's in that in-between time of life known as pregnancy. Now, we don't know exactly how far along she was. The text just says, during those days. We don't know if she had morning sickness. We don't know if she had cravings for ice cream. If she did, she was out of luck, because they didn't have it back then. Wouldn't that have been horribly cruel? But what we do know is that she decided to pay a visit to her older cousin Elizabeth, who was also pregnant. And we do know that Elizabeth lived up in the hills in a part of Israel known as Judea. And the hill country of Judea was a very rough, stony land with deep clefts and ravines. And it was through this terrain that the young, pregnant Mary traveled so that she could take care of cousin Elizabeth. Now that's doing stuff. So instead of sitting around contemplating her navel, which is a really interesting experience if you've ever seen the navel of a pregnant woman. I have on 2 occasions. Okay. Well, she didn't do that. She used this in-between time of pregnancy to do something for somebody else. So what do we do during the in-between times of our lives? Is the in-between time of uncertainty and anxiety? Sometimes it is. Is it a time of joyful expectation? Sometimes it is. Is it a time of self-indulgence and self-service? Sometimes it is. Is it a time of selflessness and concern for others? Sometimes it is. Is it a time of trust and faith? Well, if it isn't, it ought to be. What do I do between the time I make the volleyball team or the basketball team and the final game of the season or the final game of my college career? Is that a time filled with anxiety about my athletic performance? Is it used to advance my own career or to advance the success of my team? Is it a time of gratitude for the talents God has given me, or unholy pride that I am so much better than those who didn't make the team? And what do I do during the time I'm admitted to a prestigious university like Washington University and the time that I graduate? Now, as with sports, the same questions apply. Am I filled with anxiety about my academic performance? Do I hope others do worse than me so that I can succeed in doing better than they? Do I steadfastly work using the abilities that God has given me and trust enough to psychologically let go of the outcome? Do I look down on those who are able to go to a college that I consider inferior to mine? Or do I pray that they will be as successful as I hope to be? And what do I do during the time I get a diagnosis of a serious illness and the day I have my operation or the day my treatment is completed? Do I continue to live life in the best way that I can, or am I paralyzed with fear? Do I muster the strength of spirit to be concerned with the needs of others when I myself am so needy? And what do I do between the time I notice I'm in the grip of an emotion like anger or worry or envy, pride, depression, and the time that I notice that those feelings are beginning to leave my heart and my soul? Do I tough it out myself, or do I humbly seek assistance from my friends and family and professionals if need be? Do I become so self-absorbed in my own feelings that I forget about the feelings of others? What do I do between the time that I realize I need to leave a dead-end, unfulfilling job and the time that I find a new one? Or what do I do between the time I become aware that I'm in a toxic relationship and the time that I have the courage to leave it? Do I fearfully cling to what I have and what I know, like a baseball player who feels safe on first base and fears running to second base because she's not sure she'll make it safely? Being in between first base and second base is a very anxious place to be, but it's the only path to second base, to third base, and eventually to the safety and the reward of touching home plate. And what do I do between the day I got married and the time that one of our lives on this earth comes to an end? Do I act as though our life together on this earth is eternal, like the life in the ever after? Or do I treasure each day that I have with you, in good times and bad, in sickness and in health, all the days of our lives? Now, in our earthly life, everything has a beginning and everything has an end. So, how do we live our lives in between those beginnings and those endings? What stuff are we doing in those in-between times of our lives? Now, as we soon come to the end of this Advent season that we began 3 weeks ago, we ask ourselves this question: how have I used this time of waiting on the Lord? More importantly, how will I use the time between now and Christmas? And the women that we will bless at this Mass who began expecting their babies when they got pregnant or when the adoption was approved, ask themselves, how am I using this time of expectation? What am I doing now that will make me a better mother and a better wife then? And their husbands should ask themselves the same question. What am I doing now that will make me a better father and a better husband then? And each of us here today perhaps should consider how we should use the time between all the beginnings and all the endings of our lives. And in the Screwtape Letters, C.S. Lewis writes that the present is a point at which time touches eternity. The present is the point at which time touches eternity. And he goes on to say that, and I quote, obeying the present voice of conscience, bearing the present cross, receiving the present grace, giving thanks for the present pleasure. I'll repeat that. Obeying the present voice of conscience, bearing the present cross, receiving the present grace, and giving thanks for the present pleasure. So in the in-between times of our lives, we pray that we might heed the voice of God who speaks to us in our conscience, that we might have the strength to bear the crosses that God permits in our lives, that we might be open to all the graces that our gracious God wishes to bestow upon us, and that we might always and everywhere give thanks for the wonderful blessings during this holy season and during all the days of our lives. And finally, we pray that what Elizabeth said of Mary's in today's gospel reading may be said of us. Blessed are you who believed that what was spoken to you by the Lord would be fulfilled.